Nandini Sen Gupta is a Pondicherry-based journalist and author of historical fiction and narrative history. After a chance visit to Ajanta Ellora cave, she became fascinated with India's past in general and ancient India in particular. For the next 10 years, she read history for fun. Her book credits include the bestselling The Blue Horse, which I've started reading. It's actually very highly recommended. And other amazing animals from Indian history, published by Hachette, which debuted in 2020. The King, Villain and Poison Heart, books 1, 2, and 3.
3 is The Ocean Zone.
Yes. And the story of Kalidas and Gem Among Poets by Michael Gupta publication. The Ocean Zone is the third and final book in the Gupta Empire trilogy. She is currently writing her first narrative nonfiction biography to be published this year. A very, very warm welcome to you.
Thank you so much, Sudeep. It was my favorite word is serendipity, and how the dots have joined this week has been nothing short of serendipitous and absolutely amazing. So, when Lalit talked about this beautiful coming together of art and literature, word, picture, music, drama, to me it seemed like it was also about essences, about people and places. And in a sense, that's also what we saw this morning. So today, I'm going to talk a little bit about one particular city which has fascinated me for the last 10, 12 years, has lived in my head for the last 10, 12 years. And if I ask most people I know, they would say their favorite city is maybe Paris, maybe London, maybe New York, maybe Delhi, maybe Bombay. This city is a city that lived more than 1,000 years ago, maybe 2,000 years ago, and it is the city of Patliputra. So the 3 books in the Gupta Empire trilogy are very, very strongly rooted in 2 ancient cities, and over the next 15-20 minutes, I would like to just read out little excerpts from the books and talk about these amazing cities and the people that came out of these amazing cities. So, the Ocean Zone, for instance, is the story of Gupta Emperor Samudragupta, and his capital was Patliputra. And those of you who are interested in history would know that the earliest reference to how Patliputra came about can be found in this Buddhist treatise, which is Mahaparinibbana Sutta. And in that treatise, it actually talks about how Buddha was going to Kushinagara from Kashi, and on the way he sees these 2 generals of King Ajanta Ellora is known as quite a violent and not very pleasant king, but he did do one good thing in his lifetime. He founded the city of Patliputra. So when Buddha was going, he comes across these 2 ministers, Sunidhi and Vasakara, and they are digging a moat, and it is at the confluence of 2 great rivers, Ganga and Sonabhadra. And Buddha says, "What are you doing?" And they say, this area is called Pataligrama or Pataligama, because those days they spoke Pali. And we are building a fortress over here. And Buddha turns around and says, 1,000 years from now, this city will still be remembered, and people will come from far and wide to visit it. And they will forget the kings who ruled from here, but they will never forget the city. It is true, that's exactly what happened. And this incident happens during Buddha's lifetime, so it's about 500 years BCE, before Common Era. And we find Fahyan and Yuan Sang, who feature in my trilogy, talking about Patliputra in 400 CE and right up to 500, 600 CE. More than 1,000 years, this city dominated people's imaginations. And this is how Samudra Gupta, young Prince Kacha, feels when he sees, when he's talking about this city which is his home, but also his destiny. Typically, if you asked one of the perennially self-absorbed, perpetually cynical Nagaric citizens of the capital what he or she thought about Patliputra, you would get a question in return. Purva or Apara? East or west? Like today, back then also there was downtown and there was uptown. Purva, Patliputra, on the banks of the Ganga, was the tonier part of the city. Most of the wider streets, the bigger shops, better inns and taverns were to be found here. Sitting cheek by jowl with all this coin-clinking commerce were the gleaming copper pitcher or kalyan kalash adorned homes of the rich and the powerful. The imperial palace lay at the heart of this commercial and political hub. This neatly laid out city within the city was well known for its flowers. Now here, I'm giving you a little bit of history again. I'm sorry, I'm a history nut, so I'm peppered a little bit of history. There are several references to Patliputra being called the city of flowers. Kalidasa, the great poet, called it Pushpapura. Pushpa means flowers. And the Chinese visitors who came to the city, Fahian, Hyun-san, Mai-ching, all of them, called it Kusumo Ulo or Kusuma Pura. So it was known as the city of flowers. Every home had a garden, and every garden had flowering trees, vines, and shrubs. The main thoroughfare leading up from the carts of the river right up to the palace gates were lined by these private gardens on one side and a large lake on the other. In the spring, both sides would be abloom, the lake thick with the lotus and water lilies, and the gardens ablaze with marigold, champa, oleander, flame of the forest, and of course the flower that gave the city its name, Patali or the trumpet flower. Again, where did I come across these flowers? If you read Kalidasa's poetry, particularly Meghdudam, there are detailed descriptions of the kind of flowers that grew back in the day. And the funny thing is they're not that much different from the kind of flowers that we come across today. And if you go out into the countryside, those are the flowers. So entrenched was this renown for being a veritable garden that Pataliputra's second name was Kusumapura, though the venerable Chinese monks in the city's biggest monasteries had long masticated that variant to an unrecognizable Kusumapulo. This is from history, that's how I.Ching refers to Kusumapura. For me, which is Kacha, we are talking about Kacha here, or Samudra Gupta as it came to be known later, Western Appara was the more interesting part of the city. Stretched out along the Sonbhadra, this part of Patliputra grew up all higgledy-piggledy, almost without rhyme or reason. Houses jutted into each other with complete abandon. Lanes twisted and turned, split up, and snaked their way between homes and hearts, and then suddenly stopped short, as if they had tired of their destination. Gutters overflowed with the filth of the previous day's excess. Stray animals jostled for road and mine space alongside buffalo carts, ox litters, and the occasional donkey or horse rider. Pedestrians, big and small, made way. Here too there were flowers, but just like the people, they grew wherever they could. Unintended, untended, and untamed. Not brick-paved like Purva, Appara's dusty and muddy lanes would suddenly erupt in a riot of color. The bright orange of a flame tree in summer, a carpet shower of coral jasmines in autumn, and the rich red of silk cotton in spring. Here too the trumpet blew, a defiant splash of vivid yellow creeping wantonly out of cracks crannies, or anywhere it found just a fistful of earth to dig its roots into. Now you might say, are you just imagining this whole thing? But there is a dollop of imagination here. But there are so many people who have spoken in detail about Patliputra that I didn't need to do too much of imagining. That starts with Megasthenes. He was a Greek ambassador to Chandragupta Maurya's court, and he wrote this book called the Indica, where there is a very detailed description of what Patliputra looked like. That's what I have based most of this on. Also, later Greek writers like Arian and Herodotus and others have also mentioned the city in some detail. In this chaotic mix stood the Apara homes, brick-laid, mud-plastered, and often painstakingly painted with turmeric and vermilion. These humble homes made up with character what they lacked in luxury. They stood cheerfully side by side, white rangoli on their doorsteps, daring the chaos of the road outside to cross their thresholds. And that's what I liked about Apara. This random mass of homes and humanity buzzed with an energy and vigor that was infectious. Far away from the pristine flower-lined avenues of Purba, here throbbed the very heart of the realm. Simple, mud-plastered walls came alive with weird and wonderful graffiti of gods and demons, often underlined with some wry-word political humor. Tumble-down taverns with disreputable clientele were patronized by some of the best poets and artists of the day. Fact. The courtesan dancers of this quarter were known as much for their carnal creativity as for their knowledge of the Mandakranta meter. The Mandakranta meter is a very famous Sanskrit meter used very effectively by the poets of classical India. The joke was that you wouldn't become or couldn't become a poet of any consequence unless you learned your rhetoric and prosody in the arms of an Apara courtesan. Sorry, Sunil, no offense me.
Sounds good to me.
The streets pulsated with enterprise and exhaustion as people begged and bought, stole and saved, cheated and created, fought and forgave, made love and occasionally murdered each other. It was a world far away from the flowery order of Purba, but it was a world that wore no masks to hide its scars. So this entire description of Patliputra is very close to my heart because I really worked hard to get the historical references right. And if you look at what historians have talked about Patliputra, not historians of today, because as a history nut, I always feel you have to go back to the primary source, go back to people who were there, who saw it, and who wrote about it. And in the 1920s, when the digs started in Patliputra, much of this actually was confirmed. I want to do another very short 2-3 paragraphs on this beautiful city, because the city dominates the 3 books that I have written. The 3 books are talking about the 3 biggest, most well-known emperors of the Gupta era. It starts with Samudragupta in the ocean zone, followed by Chandragupta Vikramaditya in the Kingdom, and followed by Skandagupta, the last of the great Gupta monarchs, in the Poison Heart. Here's how a prince who's on the verge of maybe losing his legacy feels when he comes to the threshold of this beautiful city. On the 9th day, we reached the outskirts of Patliputra. From a distance, we could see the capital's enormous spiked wood and iron gates were closed, and there were soldiers patrolling the ramparts of the fort. A very quick detour here for the actual history. According to Megasthenes, the city was 1.5 miles by 9 miles. Remember, Megasthenes was writing during Chandragupta Maurya's time, which was very early days of Patliputra. And by the time we talk about Samudragupta, the city is well entrenched in the ancient world as something that, according to the Greek historian, was as beautiful as Babylon, Ecbatana or Sura, all the great cities of the ancient world. And when the digs were done, something very interesting came up. The archaeological survey led by J.P. Spooner and the other Indian historians did the dig. They found a palisade, a 12-feet palisade that surrounded the city. Right? Each of those, that fence had 6-inch slats, and the whole city had 570 watchtowers and 64 gates. 64 gates, all recorded by Megasthenes 2,500 years ago. And there was a moat surrounding the city. This moat was 600 feet and it was 45 feet in depth. So formidable defenses, and that's the reason why the city survived for as long as it did. It was just impregnable. I saw the imperial Garuda Dhwaja pennant fluttering gaily from the palace towers in the mellow golden sunshine, untouched by the tragedy and the uncertainty that tainted this gorgeous autumn morning. The jetty on the river Ganga, usually crowded with boats ferrying everything from flowers to Roman Sura wine to the capital. The ancients loved Roman Sura wine. If you don't believe me, go to the Pondicherry Museum. You're going to see the amphorae in which Roman wine used to come to India. Again, little tidbit which might interest you. When the wine was brought into India, obviously there was a long sea journey that involved the ferrying of this wine to India. On the way, the wine, through osmosis, became a little salty because it sort of soaked in the salty sea air. That salty wine was what Indians preferred. So, India became the chosen market for Roman wine that was salty. That is not something that they would sell anywhere else in the world. And again, our Pondicherry Museum has this amazing, huge terracotta amphorae in which that wine was carted to India. The jetty on the river Ganga, usually crowded with boats ferrying everything from flowers to Roman Sura wine to the capital, was curiously empty, but for a posse of liveried guards, their ochre uniforms clearly visible despite the distance. The guards stood with their weapons drawn, ready to strike at the slightest provocation. Clearly, the city was watching its back. Now, at this point, I'm going to sort of jump a couple of paragraphs and actually describe how he feels as he rides into the city. He is riding into a city that is not only his home, but is also his destiny. It's not only his legacy, but also something that he will protect for the rest of his life. And he goes on this Digvijaya, he goes on a conquest, and he creates this fortress, this huge empire, only to protect Patliputra. Looking back, I can recall that ride back home as vividly as if it was yesterday. I remember every small, insignificant detail. The bright golden yellow of the turmeric-smeared rice that people showered on us in fistfuls. The fragrance of the champa garlands mixed with the heady smell of wet earth as women sprinkled water on our path to settle the dust. The roar of greeting that rose from the crowds lining up alongside the wide brick and mud thoroughfare, leading up from the main gates into the palace complex at the heart of the city. The skyline gleaming with its row of coppered urns adorning the doorways of prominent noblemen, the vermilion and turmeric wall paintings depicting everything from Vishnu's conch shell to ears of rice, Lakshmi's footprints and the swastika symbol, little children playing hopscotch beside the road, rows of shops selling betel leaf, areca nuts, beads, bangles, sweetmeats and salty spiced yogurt, all the excited voices, the combined cacophony of kettle drums, town criers, and the clop-clop of horse hooves, every sound every sight remains seared in my mind's eye to this day. I remember drinking it all in greedily as my heart swelled. I was never more in love with Pondicherry. This rambling, brick-laid city of princes and paupers, aspirations and avarice, virtue and venom was more than my fault. It was my destiny. And I knew in that moment, no matter how many times I lost my heart, Patliputra would always claim it back.
Thank you, Nandini. I don't know whether the gourd we have in Patali gourd has nothing to do with that.
Could be. Could well be, I don't know.
The archaeological people dug it and consumed it. Clearly. So next we have Sabine Iqbal, a very good friend. He's a man of many parts. He's a great father who's coaching his daughter to be an international cricketer for the Indian cricket team. She's a very talented cricketer. So most of the pictures I see is of her scoring square cuts and hitting sixes. But he's a wonderful novelist. I've read his first book and wrote about it, Cliffhanger, a couple of copies there for sale as well. And Shamal Days, which just came out last year. Apart from that, he has been a journalist.